we are starting with it. Hello everyone, I am Kanika Agrawal, a volunteer at Adore, and I wholeheartedly welcome you all to our webinar session on how to become a more interesting person conducted by Mr. Jamshed Kulkarni. Adore is a global voluntary platform which aims to motivate youth to identify and undertake positive activities for a better society. We are a community network of university students and professionals who interact with the students so that they can grow up as a successful professionals and responsible citizens. Now I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our speaker for the webinar, Mr. Jamshed Kulkarni. Many of you may know him as one of our trainees. He is from a hospitality background and he is currently transitioning from a more tech-intensive role. He has a great deal of experience dealing with people and the issues that arise in managing them. He is an avid drummer, self-taught coder, and a bibliophile who firmly believes that there is never a time someone can stop learning new things. So now I welcome Mr. Jamshed Kulkarni, and I would like to request you to please enlighten us with your knowledge. Over to you.
Thank you, Kanika, for that lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. I welcome you to this session. As I'm sure you know, today we'll be learning, well, I'll be giving you a few steps as to how you can, first of all, make yourself be a more interesting person. Before we start, just a couple of guidelines that I'd like to lay down. One, if you have any questions, if you don't understand something or you're confused, please feel free to interrupt. There's no, consider this very informal. There's no, it's not me telling you something. It is an exchange. It's an exchange of ideas, things I've learned myself and that I want you to learn as well so that you can, use them in your life. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Just give me a second. Is my screen visible? Can you see my screen?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, great. Now, so let me just play the presentation. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so like I said, how to become a more interesting person. Now, before we start, I'll just outline a few things that we need to understand. This is going to be a 3-step plan that will help you over a fairly long period of time to understand what it is to be an intellectual and an interesting person, or it's just to help you improve. If you don't think you're interesting now, and I'll shed light on why that's not true, these steps will help you kind of take stock and improve on what you think needs work. So it's a no nonsense strategy. How and why I have labeled these steps largely revolving around nonsense is because nonsense is a very interesting concept. Okay. It's used rather negatively in today's connotation, but the actual dictionary understanding of this is something that doesn't make sense to you. And I'm going to say this a lot of times throughout this presentation, is that being interesting and of interest are very subjective terms. Something that I may find interesting, you may not, or something that your mom and dad may find interesting, you may not. So it's all very subjective. So we'll go by this on a step-by-step manner with the first step, which is choosing your nonsense. So what does choosing your nonsense entail? The first part of this step is that everyone doesn't understand everything. Look at me, okay? I came from a hospitality background. I studied hotel management at an undergraduate level, but I've always been very interested in astronomy. Throughout my life, when in school and in college, I've always kept a close eye on space and space-related news. And that was something that I used to be really passionate about when I was younger. And when I would talk about all this with my friends, sometimes it didn't really make an impact, simply because it wasn't something that they related to. It wasn't something that they were capable of appreciating because it didn't have that kind of interest in it. So before you go into this entire process, you have to keep this in mind. whatever you do in life, whether that's something you're doing right now, something you'll do, and that's okay. And I'll tell you why it's okay in a little bit. Repeated trial and error. That is a very big part of coming to terms with what it is to be an interesting person and to be engaging. You have to do things a lot. And I don't mean it like, you do something over and over again. You have to try and you have to fail. For example, when I first started learning how to play the drums, I didn't quite understand what the whole logic of the drums was. Was it just that you beat two pieces of skin with a stick? Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And also one problem, if anyone's ever tried to learn the drums, is that there's a certain height requirement, okay? Because first of all, they're kind of tall, and I was a very short kid. So trying to kind of manage that when you're like 8 years old and you can't really understand what this to do is kind of difficult. So don't give up. And we'll kind of stress on that point just a little bit later. When you try something, keep trying at it, keep giving it your 100%, and keep trying new things. Just because you tried one thing today does not mean you don't have to try anything for the next 6 weeks. You have to make sure that every now and then you are trying something new and are trying something different from what you did yesterday or 2 weeks ago. And the final part of this first step is that you need to start liking and appreciating what you actually like and not what you're supposed to. Because, and this is not just, common to India, this is actually common to most of South Asia. It's that a lot of us are told what to do from a very young age. And that's fine. Your parents tell you, okay, this is how you hold a spoon. This is how you shouldn't touch hot things. And these are, survivalistic instincts, which are largely evolutionary. These have come from places where we have learned through experience. 2000 years ago when or 5000 years ago when man first discovered fire, he then discovered not to touch it. And that's what your parents teach you now. Don't touch a naked flame. But what this ends up doing is this kind of spills over into your personal and social lives. For example, I'm saying not all of you, but some of you may have had parents who want to take a particular career path. You'll be studying and they're like, beta, you need to study engineering, or you need to study medicine, or you need to do X thing, Y thing. Of course, to them it's guidance, but to most of us, it will probably come off as a rigid instruction that beyond this, there's nothing. And there are reasons for that, those instructions that are being thrown at you. I mean, of course, it's generational, it's also cultural. And justifying those reasons is that will take a whole other session. But the point I'm trying to stress on right now is that you need to, once you're independent or you're at a point of independence where, you can say that I do things on my own, you need to start doing what you like. So for example, if you're in college, you have a fair degree of independence and you're going to start trying to understand what your personality is all about. So when I went to college, I had a lot of freedom, more so than I did at home at least. And what that allowed me to do was to explore avenues that I wouldn't have explored otherwise. I picked up coding, for example. Not something I really would have had time for at home, plus my studies and all would keep me really busy. So that was something I was able to explore. And I didn't really like it at first, but simply because it reminded me of how I used to keep trying to finish puzzles when I was younger. I really got into it. And then that, led to a passion that I'm exploring now on my own in my career. So that's what I'm trying to say. Like what you like, not what other people tell you to like. These three are the first things you need to cover if you're trying to make yourself more personable, more interesting, and more engaging. Let's move on to the second step. And that's going crazy about what it is that is nonsensical about you. So the first step is you need to start committing. Very often what ends up happening is over and above what it is that we do, like look at what you do for Adore. Many of you will be doing different things. Someone's going to be doing graphic design. Someone's going to be doing website development. Someone's going to be reviewing daily journals. It's It's a whole wide variety of things. But I think the one thing that you'll find in common is that the people who really like what they're doing are committed. And, this is probably not a conversation you've had with anyone here, or maybe you have, I don't know. But you have to first look at it. What is it that you're doing? Do you like what you're doing? And are you committing 100%? Because if you're not committing to 100%, then you are learning very little, or you're learning a very superficial sort of deal. So for example, I also really like to cook. I've been cooking since I was 10 years old. And the whole reason I like cooking is something I'll get into a little later in the third point. But when I first started cooking, my idea of cooking was, okay, I'm going to make Maggie. So every day I used to come home from school and I used to make Maggie. One entire packet of Maggie and be like, oh my. So it's not as simple as that. You have to do your research. If you want to learn something new, you need to plan. First of all, how is it that you're going to learn it? What is it that you want to do? And design enough time and effort that you're going to put into it so that you make sure that you've given it your 100%. If you want to learn the guitar, make sure you've researched what kind of music do you want to play on the guitar. Of course, it's all about exploration, but there's plenty of things available on the internet that you can explore, or you need to explore before you kind of 100% commit to the whole thing. And once you've found everything that you need to do, you just give it your all. Because if you don't give it your all, then you will come to realize what the problems with that, 75%, 60% you're giving. So I'll touch on that a little later. The second part of this step is that you need to absorb and take in as much as you can. The process has to be fun, not the end goal. And I think many people have this conception that, oh, I'll be happy once I've reached there. I'll be happy once I've become a successful rock musician, or I'll be happy once I'm a $55 billion worth investment banker. Life is never that simple, and you'll often realize that most of what it is that you do, the fun that you have is through the experiences that you have on the way. When you join small organizations, when you meet people who you never thought you'd meet simply because they're from different domains or industries or whatever. When you join a salsa class, for example, you will not learn salsa in 1 day or 1 hour. You will have to take that salsa class for months on end until you become confident in your abilities to, perform on stage or whatever. But you will often come to realize that the most fun you had was not when you were performing on stage. It was when you were stumbling and falling, and you made new friends because other people stumbled and fell around you. So that has to be the main focus, the process, not the end goal. And the third step in this particular one is, if you don't enjoy something, you need to drop it. And what this means is that, like I said earlier, you need to try a lot of new things. Okay. There's no way, nobody knows when they're born that, baby is born, first thing in his head is, okay, I know that I'm going to learn the guitar. I'm going to learn, I'm going to learn Malayalam, and I'm going to learn JavaScript coding by the time I'm 35. Nobody knows this. And anyone who's telling you that they do is lying, or they're like, really sorted, which is rare. But in case you do find something that you are passionate about, you need to, of course, really make sure that you are enjoying it. Okay. And many of us make this mistake that when you start doing something, when you start enjoying it, and you start kind of going into the details of this activity, sometimes you'll find that it's not your cup of tea. It's difficult. It's, you make a lot of mistakes. And, after 6-7 months of you making this effort, you find that you've not gotten anywhere. So here's where you have to kind of take a step back and review. First of all, have you really committed 100%? That's the first honest question you have to ask yourself. If you've not committed 100%, then you can't expect the results from a person, from as if you were committing 100%. Okay. The second question is, if you have indeed committed 100%, what have been the major mistakes that you have made? And are you repeating them? So for example, if you start making posters on Canva, okay, you often find that the more you make these posters, the faster you get. But the problem is that you're facing is that some of the images that you're pasting over onto the Canva background are not they're too small, or the resolution is too large, or whatever. And you find that you're making these mistakes over and over and over again, which basically means that you're not learning from your mistakes. Then if you find that you're not learning from your mistakes, then that is something that you can fix. Because this point where we cover dropping what it is that you're trying to learn only covers exigencies and emergencies where everything that you're doing is, as it's supposed to be done, but it's still working against you. Like, for example, let's say you start going to the gym. Okay. You picked up your weights, you're doing it, you went 6 months in a row, but you're not seeing any results. And you've made sure that you have a trainer, you've been eating right, you've been doing all kinds of workouts, but you're just not, it's not happening. And, you go to the doctor, you say, okay, doctor, I can't understand what's going wrong. And he turns out and says, well, you have, hypothyroidism, which prevents muscle gain. Something like that, And he says, I don't think you should go to the gym. I think you should focus more on bodyweight exercises like Pilates or, general calisthenics. That's when you have to understand that, okay, maybe this isn't for me. And that's important because as humans and in human psychology, we have something known as the sunk cost fallacy, which basically says that if we as people have put in time and effort into something, means that we must continue to commit to it or continue to, stay involved in it simply because our time, effort, and money has gone into it, which is not really something that we should do as a person. Number one, and this is where you'll see the most common cases. For example, I'm sure everyone has bought something from some shop somewhere, whether it's Amazon or it's at your local grocery store or it's, at a clothes store. And you've bought it, you've paid the money for it, you've come home and you use it, and then you realize I don't like it. Like the product is not good, or it doesn't work as intended, and you can't return it. So, and in some cases, and actually in a lot of cases, you'll find that people who you won't even like it, but you'll continue to use it, or you'll be asked by other people to use it simply because you spend money on it. Okay. When did we as a society collectively decide that just because you spend money on it, and I understand that this is about money's inherent value, not the product, but when did we as a society decide that just because you put money towards it, you need to use it? Like, who came up with that rule? It's arbitrary and it's strange, and it's not something that you should, constantly keep reminding yourself. So for example, if you bought a guitar, but you just, your fingers are too small for the strings, or something else is preventing you from playing, you feel bad because, you paid like 5,000 rupees for that guitar and now it's just lying there, and you're forced to pick it up every now and then because you're like, I have to make sure this is paisa vasool. That's okay for a while, but it's only going to cause you pain in the long run. And a lot of this will end up as bitterness, because the more you have these things. So like, for example, let's say you bought a bad car and you're telling your friend, oh, I bought this Hyundai i20 and it's such a terrible car, but I'm forced to use it because I bought it. And this is all you talk to your friend about. Every time you meet him, you're like, I bought this car, it's terrible, it's giving me terrible mileage, its tire got punctured, the engine is crap. So it becomes all you talk about, consumes you. And of course, this is a very extreme example about cars, but these things do affect your mental psyche. So that's something to keep in mind. If you genuinely cannot get into something, you need to be okay with letting topic for a different day. Third step in this process is talking about how you can, talking about what it is that you're passionate about. This is the meat of the entire process of becoming interesting people. Because more than anything, it does not matter if you're you like solving abacus puzzles, or you like solving crossword puzzles, or you just like going on long drives. No matter what it is that you do, if you are not an efficient communicator and you can't really put forward what it is that you want to say with conviction and with pride, then no one ever is going to find you interesting. So, like I said, the first point revolves around effective and efficient communication. Now, how do you become efficient and effective communicators? Well, it doesn't take, there's a lot of science behind human communication, and most of it is rather technical, so I won't get into it here because it will take far too long. But a few tips that I can give you are, number one, you have to speak confidently and clearly. Like I'm talking to you, if someone has not been able to understand me, this is your time to say, Jamshed, I've not understood anything you said because you've been talking too fast. Anyone? No? Great, which means my point is working. And how do you make sure that you're talking or you're speaking clearly? Well, first you need to think before you speak. A lot of us will have this habit where, our mouths are moving, but our brain is kind of lagging behind. Okay, so you'll be talking in your brain like, acha, wait, let me catch up, which is okay. It happens, especially when we're a little nervous. And for many of us, something like Adore, for example, when you gave your interview or you're being asked to give an introduction, for people who have never given introductions to a group of people, it can be challenging. So I think the easiest step to overcome all of this is to kind of give more interviews, or to see how people give interviews, or you want tips, you ask for help. But the important step in being a good communicator is, number one is talking clearly and make sure you know what it is that you're talking about. Number two is talking slowly. You have to slow down your speech. You have to make sure that when you say something, you're not in a hurry to kind of get it over with, because communication is not something that you can rush. There are nuances, there are emotions, there are intonations that reflect in our voices and are specific to each of us. And if we don't take the time to kind of make sure we're easing everyone into this process, then we're going to get into trouble, because people may misunderstand, they may get offended, and that's the wrong thing that you want to communicate when you're trying to tell someone that you're terrible at the guitar. Let's say if I tell someone, I'm terrible at the guitar just like you, and that person might just take offense, but the joke being that they don't know how to play guitar, they may not get that. But you have to understand that being clear and concise will take you so far, even if it doesn't matter. Like, even if you're giving a small presentation, even if you're just talking to your mom and dad, just slow down and keep a cool head. And finally, I think the easiest way to become a better communicator is to just speak in as few words as you can. That doesn't mean, you ignore key grammatical words. It means saying what you think truthfully, honestly, and without concern for how people may perceive it. So for example, if you don't like something, you should say, I don't like it. Not actually, I prefer if you were to tone it down. No, just say, I don't like it, please change it. And the more you kind of express this in-depth emotion in a manner which is clear, concise, and you said it slowly, people will start listening to you. And that is the only thing you really want, right? Like, out of life, you just want people to listen to you. And once you've got people listening to you, you automatically become interesting, because that's all it is. Being interesting means you have people listening to you. So that's the first step. After that, after that comes storytelling. And storytelling is an absolutely vital part of getting people to listen to you. Okay. Now, how do you ensure that you're telling a story which is engaging, it's impactful, and it's keeping everyone involved? Well, there's no way to tell. Really. You just have to look at everyone and see if they're all listening, or they're on their phones, or they're doing something. That's usually a bad sign. But if everyone's quiet, they're looking at you, their body language is kind of focused towards you, then that's an excellent indicator that what you're saying is hitting home, or it's touching them at a point where they can sense it within them. They can relate to it. And becoming a good storyteller is not easy, and it's something that usually takes a lot of time. There are, of course, various types of storytelling. which I can't really cover because that also is a really rather technical topic, but I will give you some helpful links and all after this session to kind of guide you in case you want to discover what your type of storytelling is. But I can give you, of course, some general tips to understand what a good storyteller represents. So number one, a good storyteller knows what the point of his communication is. Now, I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes when I'm trying to tell someone something, I have one point that I want to make, but then while I'm making that point, it kind of devolves into another thing, and then it kind of gets distracting, and then they end up losing interest. Sometimes, you get confused. Ki, I don't know what is the original point that I had to make. So it's important to be clear about what it is that you're trying to convey. For example, I want to tell you guys that I like cooking. I could tell you cooking. I could tell you that I like cooking like this. I like cooking. It is great fun. And it doesn't require a lot of time, doesn't require a lot of skill. It's great. That's one way. Or I could tell you that I got into cooking because when I was very young, my grandmother, every Sunday, she would invite the entirety of our extended family for lunch at 1:30 p.m. sharp, and she would always have these intricately made dishes that she would make herself. And I still don't understand how she had the time, because she was a doctor, she was a gynecologist at the time, and she would make sure that everyone had something they could eat, everyone had something they could enjoy. And if someone really liked something one last week, she'd always repeat it or something like that. And it was really a representation of how this one person did so much for others selflessly, and that emotion for me is what is bonded into my need to cook, that I can replicate that feeling, that what I'm doing for other people. So now you see there are two aspects of this where I was able to tell you why I like cooking. I like cooking because I gave you a factual explanation and I gave you an emotional explanation. And depending on what kind of person you are, these facets will change. If you are the sort of person who loves to the point succinct stories, you'll probably relate to that factual approach more. But if you're the type of person who likes to listen to podcasts or something long drawn out things, then you'll probably relate to my emotional retelling of that aspect more. So that is very important. You have to understand, if you're going to tell a story, what kind of story it is that you want to tell. If it's emotional, then you need to kind of juxtapose it like that. If it's factual, then you need to phrase it like that. If you're trying to get someone to relate to what it is you're trying to say, then it's always better to kind of add that little bit of emotion to it, because then they can also understand, okay, this is how it made you feel, rather than just how it was. It's very, that's why, I don't know if you've ever read a history book, it'll never be this happened in 1867, this happened in 1900, this happened in 2100. It'll be like, this happened in 1967 because the Berlin Wall fell down because this guy was mad and that woman got upset. There's a whole chronology to the whole thing. So that's very important. So if you really want to become an interesting person and you want to keep people interested around you, you have to learn how to tell a good story. And it can be about anything. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be about some really deep personal secret. It can be about how one day you were walking your dog and you stumbled on the road and then your dog bit you by accident, something like that. And the final kind of aspect of this is reading the room. This is something I can't really stress upon enough, because reading the room means that you have to make sure that you, as a person, the person who's storytelling, the person who's trying to be more interesting, understands what the tone of the room is. Okay. Now, if you go into, let's say you go to a funeral or you go to someone's memorial service, the room is somber, it's sad, people are upset because they've lost a loved one, and you start telling jokes in the middle of that, and then people are going to be like, I don't think this is appropriate, and then you're going to come off as inappropriate. People are not going to react well to what it is that you're trying to say, even if it may be something that's completely harmless. So you need to understand to what kind of situation it is that you're trying to tell your story. Is this appropriate or not? Am I still audible? My microphone stopped working. Someone hear me? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, but there are some glitches in between.
Okay, I don't know. Who shoot this. Okay. Anyway, so now it's clear, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, what I was saying was you should definitely understand the tone of the situation that you're entering. Okay. If you enter, a political discussion, and like most political discussions, it's a very emotional sort of scene. Simply, although I don't understand why politics and emotions should largely be kept separate, but it is very important that before you kind of begin what it is you're trying to say, you understand that everything that you're saying is in line with the sentiment in the room. Because if you find that something you're saying is conflicting with the sentiment at large, then you're not going to come off as interesting. It is going to come off as someone who's rather offensive. So that's something to keep in mind. Be interesting by talking clearly, communicating efficiently. Be interesting by telling a story. And when you tell that story, you have to make sure that what it is you're telling a story in the appropriate situation for that story. Okay. Okay. Now, some general tips that I can give you. Of course, everything that I've told you so far, it represents something that you need to do in the long term. Okay. These are not things that will happen overnight, especially that sunk cost fallacy stuff. Trying to understand what it is that people can do to become more interesting can come off as difficult and more challenging than it may seem in the short term, which is why there are some tips I can give you to kind of change your approach to becoming more interesting within the next 24 hours. Okay. And we'll get to that. But at this point, I have given you a lot of stuff to kind of think about. Take your time. Don't rush through it simply because it can get kind of addictive because you're like, oh, I'm super motivated. I need to do this, do that. And even if you're not motivated, you just need to really take it one step at a time. You don't need to rush into anything. I can share this presentation with you if you like. Just go through it once again, see if you have any doubts, and write them down. Ask your friends, ask your family, and the more you talk to people, like I think that's the easiest thing. The more you talk to people, the more you'll come to understand that interest and being interesting is an external value that we project upon ourselves, and that's the first point here. Be interested to be interesting. When you pay careful attention to what someone is saying, whether that's me or that's your younger sister when she's talking about her tea party, or the local chai wala when he's selling you cutting chai, it's important to pay attention, even if for a little bit, because you will come to understand that in those 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, there really is something that you didn't know before. It's possible, right? Like it's more likely that you don't know something than it is that you know it, unless you're like really smart and you're 100 years old and you know everything. You've seen everything. Although at 100 years old, probably you have bigger concerns than what it is that you've learned. But the key point is that whenever you do something or whenever you're talking to someone rather, just make sure that you're giving your 100% attention. Even if you're half of what they say, just give 100%. Because when people see you paying attention, they feel better. They feel, okay, this person is paying attention to me because he genuinely wants to learn. And that makes him kind of interesting. Imagine if someone when you're talking to someone and they give you what you can see in their eyes that they are focused on nothing but you. Isn't that a good feeling? And don't you feel better about the person giving you that kind of attention? So that's very important. The second is to read and watch interesting things. This probably should have been my first point, but you need to start consuming content, and especially now when so much of it is available online, you need to start consuming content which will make you grow. And how do you find that content is tricky, but I can give you a sort of easy plan to kind of figure out what it is that you usually can watch or read to make your horizons broaden. And I'll give you and I'll recommend two of my favorite books and two movies which I think everyone should watch because it'll give you a lot to talk about. But yeah, before we get to that, how do you find things to watch that are outside your periphery? Number one, just write down what kind of things you like to read or watch. For example, if you really like action movies, just write that. I like watching action, I like watching horror, and I like watching romantic comedies. Okay, you write that, and then you start. And what you read, so do the same thing for your books. Okay, and if you don't read any books, I really can't say this enough. You need to read more books, please. Reading more books equals more interesting person. As simple as that. Okay, so now that you've listed all your genres and all the things that you watch, keep it aside. Go on Google. Search for every other genre aside from what you like watching. If you like watching action, horror, rom-com, search for thrillers, search for histories, search for documentaries. Things that are outside your viewpoint. And then go like top 10 documentaries, top 10, sociological issue movies, stuff like that. And you will find things that you had never ever even considered that you'd watch. And yeah, I mean, you may not like the first movie that you watch, you may not like the second, but you will definitely like some. And when you like some, you will automatically have more to talk about. You will have automatically given yourself room to grow. Okay, so and that's where my recommendations come in. So I think, are we good on time? We're good on time. So two books that I think everyone should read, everyone, and they're very simple books. Number one is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan B. Peterson. Jordan B. Peterson is a professor of clinical psychology. He taught at the University of Toronto, and he's actually a rather misunderstood psychologist simply because he doesn't conform to what society largely believes, but nonetheless is an excellent writer, is an excellent orator. So you must read this book, 12 Rules for Life. It will give you 12 steps on how to keep your life very organized, and everything that you do, like on a day-to-day basis, will just become, you'll go on autopilot. You'll have time to think about everything else in your life but these small things. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is Unthink by Chris Paley. Unthink is an excellent book to read about how we as people think we know or we believe a lot of things. We think we know a lot, but in reality, we know very little, okay, about how things work, about how people work. And this is a great book to help you realize that. It helps you realize that there is very little that you as a person really truthfully know. Okay. So those are my two favorite books that everyone should read. The two movies that I think everyone should watch, number one is Interstellar. Some of you may have already seen this. It's a great movie by Christopher Nolan about a lot of things really, but largely the theme is interstellar space travel and time and all that. It's like a whole thing, like it's a whole scientific paper on its own. But it's an excellent movie, and I think anyone who hasn't seen it should definitely watch it. Okay. And anything, you can actually really watch anything by this gentleman, Christopher Nolan. He makes amazing movies, and he has a rather unique take on what entertainment should be. And the next movie that you should watch, and I think everyone should watch, is The Help. Okay, The Help is a movie about the 1950s, 60s roughly, when racism was still very prevalent in the United States, and how despite people being treated as equal, people of color, especially African Americans, were treated very poorly by the whites who were the majority then. And it's an excellent movie about understanding how different personalities and different viewpoints can change who you are as a person. So those are my recommendations. The third general tip that I'll give you is that you need to show your vulnerability. Okay. Now, interesting people, whoever you may find interesting. For example, let's say you find Arvind Kejriwal very interesting. Okay. That's okay. You find something within, he says something that really resonates within you. Okay. And that's fine. But there's a reason you find him so interesting. Is because something that he is vulnerable, something that he is honest about, is reflecting within you that you are finding relatable. Okay. So when you talk to people and when you tell them something about yourself, you need to tell them the full honest truth. There's no reason to be ashamed of who you are. Although this is and I know this is very easy to say and very difficult to implement, but
everything that you do, everything that you say, you must try to be as vulnerable and as confident about your beliefs as possible. Because if you're not vulnerable, if you're not honest, then that means that there is a sort of neediness within you that needs to be, that says, I need you, the external person, to be okay with who I am. That's not what interesting people represent. Interesting people are unafraid of other people judging their personalities, judging their viewpoints, and they're okay with conflict. And like I said, everyone is not going to understand everything. That's why the word nonsense exists. Okay. So you must be vulnerable. You must honestly depict who you are as a person. Please don't ever try to hide that. Because eventually, when the more you interact with someone, whether that's your sibling or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whatever, you will find that eventually that true self will come out. And that thing that you were hiding will no longer be hidden. And then that person will be like, but this is not who you were, 10 months ago. Why have you changed? When in reality, you haven't changed. You just went back to what you really were. So, very important, please be honest about who you are. And the final step is pushing your comfort zone. Okay. When you push your comfort zone, you are forcing yourself to, of course, try new things. That's obvious. But it also means that you're willing to take a step to improve. Okay. And this is something that you need to do now. All these 4 tips, these are things you can do today. Within within the next 6 hours, you can do all 4 of these things. You can pay attention to someone with 100% attention. You can read something or you can watch a movie. These movies, Interstellar is kind of long, okay, but the help is like 1.5 hours, 90 minutes, not much. The third is showing vulnerability. Again, when you're talking to someone, you can be honest. And the fourth one is pushing your comfort zone. Just do something small, anything that you've been afraid to do, that you've not managed to do in the last week, 10 days. You want to tell someone you don't like them, tell them. You want to start learning something new, just open the website and look at a video about it. Something small that represents a change in your current position and your position within the next 10 seconds. What is the delta? What is the change? Okay. And yeah, I think that's it. And if you find that over time, as you implement these ideologies, you implement these processes, you will find that not only you will come to realize that the idea of being interesting is subjective, of course, but it also means that you find your own self interesting, because all of this kind of boils down to self-esteem. We think we're not interesting. Why? Because at some level, at some core belief, we don't believe that we are enough. We don't believe that we're sufficient. That's wrong. Every one of you sitting in this Zoom call is enough. You don't actually even need to do anything to be more interested. All you need to learn is good communication and a good way to, kind of inform others as to what it is that you do. And, the more confident you become in this aspect, you'll find that you become more interesting. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Hello everyone, I would request that anybody would have any questions.
One second, Kanika, I don't take any pages. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
Okay. So if anybody have any questions, they can drop their questions in the chat box, or they can just unmute and ask them. Do anybody have questions?
Well, I'm glad, because although I'm sure you should have had questions, but it's good. Seems like everyone's understood everything. There is now a quiz after this session, by the way, on everything I've just said. So get ready to give your answer.
Yeah, sure. So how we need to give our answers, like in a chat box, or we have to just unmute and speak?
No, I'm kidding. There's actually no quiz. I think the idea was that everyone should ask a question, but it's okay. Well, I'm glad. I hope you guys enjoyed the session. And if you have any questions at any point during this process, I'll share this presentation if you want to go through it once. And if you have any questions, I'm here for the next 6 months. So you can always shoot me a message. Okay.
Okay, there's a question.
Hello.
The points
Let me ask a question.
Yes,
Yeah,
Gagan.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Many of the times what happens, like I attend some or also organize some meetings with my
Hmm.
fellow candidates, or
Hmm.
colleagues. So what
Hmm.
happens, and also the people who I not ever meet, like, so what happens,
Hmm.
how to be engage peoples in the meetings, like we are talking some technical topics, right? Yes,
Hmm.
always we had some discussions about science and other things. So
Hmm.
what I feel is like, if I start talking about science, what happens, like people are less engaged in between. So how to get back to the that position? So I feel this problem many times. Like, so can you give
Hmm.
something
Yeah.
so I
So
can? Yeah.
I completely understand, because especially when it comes to stuff like, I'll give you a personal example. Okay, like when I first started learning how to code, I had a lot of questions. Like I didn't know who to approach, but thankfully we had like an IT professor in college who I used to go. I used to be like, listen, I have this question. And whenever I used to tell my friends, they'd have this look on their face, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, so I think the easiest way that I found to make it kind of relatable was see how I can put it into real life. So can you give me an example of something that you were trying to explain that people didn't understand?
Yes,
Any
yes.
small thing.
Okay, so I just often have meetings about climate science related things. So what
Okay.
happens, like, if people are not really belonging to that background, so they may feel like
Hmm.
travel in an understanding, maybe, I think so.
Hmm.
In that kind of situation, like, I try to give some examples that they can relate to,
Hmm.
but many of the times, like, it happens. uh,
Yeah. Okay. Definitely, I can understand that. So one suggestion that I'd give you is when you're trying to explain something to someone who's not from that background or doesn't understand, do a little research beforehand and keep some links that kind of explain the stuff in a very simplified way. Okay. You, for example, something like, I don't know much about climate sciences, but I don't know, global warming. Let's say, for example, it's a rather complicated process, right? Because we have to understand it's not just about the CO2 from cars, heating up the atmosphere. There's 10,000 different things involved. But see if you can break it down into parts. And if you've made it as simple as it can be, then you've done all that you can. Because sometimes, like I said, people are just going to be like, okay, aap bolte rahiye, that's going to be their approach to it. But if you've done everything that you can, and you know that you've made it absolutely 100% simple that even a toddler would understand it, then you have to just be confident. Yeah, I've done everything that I can. If they are not understanding it now, it's on them. They are not making the effort. Okay. I know it's very easy to blame ourselves. There's something wrong within me. But just remember, if you've done everything possible, then sometimes the fault is in them too.
Thank you.
Okay? No
Yes,
problem.
yes.
Anything else, guys?
Um, Hi, sir.
Tanya, I'm not sir. Please don't call me sir.
You are speaking for the day.
Please just call me Jamshed.
Okay. So Jamshed, I have a question. You mentioned that we should start doing things that we've never done before, like coming out of our comfort zone. So if I would
Absolutely.
start trying, watching a movie or reading a book which is not my type, so I often feel drowsy.
Okay.
So how can I engage myself in those things?
Okay. So of course, I think what you're trying to tell me is that you get a little bored if you're trying something new, and that's fair. So personally, when I want to do something new, I usually do it first thing in the morning, and I totally relate to what you're saying. Because after, like, imagine, okay, after all adore come at like 7:30 p.m., you just want to eat your dinner, you want to watch something that you've seen 10,000 times before, and you want to go to sleep again. So the easiest thing to do is first thing in the morning, just thoda sa half an hour you clear out, and tab when you're like, bilkul, your brain is saying sleep, but you'll be more prepared to kind of do this kind of stuff. Okay. So you should probably do it first thing in the morning. That's how I at least do it. If I ever have to do something difficult or not something that I'm comfortable with, I try to do it as early as possible. So give it a try. I don't know if it'll work for you. If it does, great. If you don't, then you can probably come back to me and we can discuss something and figure out something a little bit more personalized.
Surely try.
Yeah.
Just one thing I would like to ask you, like for a personal being, my voice audible?
Yeah, I can hear you, Kanika.
Okay. So the thing is that when there is a complete silence in the room, there are some spaces in nowadays that what happens that when you enter a room, there are complete silence. People are even they are not talking among themselves who they know. So at times we need a conversation starter. Right?
Yeah.
So what will you suggest regarding this?
Well, the easiest thing to kind of ask anyone, like for example, if you take a Zoom call, okay, and you enter and you've got Riddhi in there, you've got Rishka, you've got people you know, but everyone's kind of quiet. So you just pick anyone, whoever you're most comfortable with. Be like, "Hi, Rishika, how are you? How's the day going?" And that will start a conversation. And once you kind of get into that conversation, that one person, you start involving the others. It is a little difficult and it can get a little awkward simply because if they weren't talking before you came.
There is a very intimated silence between the people. So as an intimated silence, we have to break them out, and whenever we start speaking or whenever do some awkward kind of a thing that you're mentioning, people look as that with an insight that we are somebody weird. We are not suited to that appropriate conditions. So at that time, the confidence level is very low,
See, the thing is, right, sometimes the conversation will die. Like, that is inevitable. It also kind of depends on how much effort you're willing to put in, the other person is willing to put in. So, like I told Gagan, try your best. Nahi hota, leave it. It's okay. Again, like I said, the sunken cost fallacy indicates that just because you put time, effort into one thing, if it's not working, despite everything that you've done, leave it. Tension लेने की जरूरत ही नहीं है. Life is too short. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was very insightful.
No problem. Anything else, guys? Okay, I don't know if there's any other questions. In case there are, you can always reach out to me. I'm here for the next 6 months, like I said.
Yeah. So guys, if you don't have any question, we would move further. We have shared the feedback link in the chat box. Do share your feedbacks with us. Do question and comment us. Do share it with us. So on behalf of Adore and all the members present here, I would like to thank you, Mr. Jamshed Kulkarni, for sharing his wisdom through this insightful session. Thank you, and it was a pleasure actually having you here. That the things you said were quite relatable.
Oh, no,
and we are moving. What are you saying?
No, I'm saying the pleasure was all mine. And I'm glad I was able to kind of share this knowledge with everyone. And I hope it was useful. That's all, more than anything.
Yeah. Sure. We are moving forward to have many sessions with you regarding this as well. Thank you all participants for joining us today. Please, we have already provided the feedback link. Do share your feedback with us, everyone.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining in.
Thank you.